Once again, Turkey. Once again, Istanbul. The third round of negotiations between Kiev and Moscow is kicking off after an almost 2-month break. What has changed during this time? What are the Ukrainian and Russian delegations hoping for? And how do Kiev's partners plan to respond if the Kremlin drags out the peace process again? Let's figure it out. The first round of negotiations took place on May 16th at the Dolmabahce presidential palace on the Bosphorus. Notably, it was Putin himself who, during a phone conversation with Turkish President Erdogan, suggested holding a summit-level meeting. As a result, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy flew to Turkey, along with hundreds of journalists from around the world, but the Kremlin dictator never showed up. As a result, a meeting between the leaders of Ukraine and Turkey took place in Ankara, while the negotiating teams headed to Istanbul. The Ukrainian delegation included representatives from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, the Office of the President, and the Security Service of Ukraine. This level of representation made it possible to make decisions that could lead to a just peace. Meanwhile, the Russian delegation did not include a single sitting minister, and it was headed by Putin's advisor, Vladimir Medinsky. Here's what the British newspaper The Telegraph wrote about this.
Vladimir Putin's chief delegate at the peace talks with Ukraine is a historian who once claimed that Russians have an extra chromosome because of their superiority. Putin not only refused to attend the negotiations in Istanbul personally, he didn't send any of the Kremlin heavyweights either. However, we can be sure that Mr. Medinsky will definitely not deviate from the script written for him in Moscow. From a publication by The Telegraph dated May 16, 2025.
The main result of the first round of negotiations was a large-scale prisoner exchange, 1,000 for 1,000. Russia still did not agree to the 30-day ceasefire that Kiev and the United States insisted on. The next meeting in Istanbul on June 2nd also changed little. It lasted only an hour. Putin's negotiators continued to put forward unrealistic and completely unfounded demands. For example, to recognize 4 Ukrainian regions as Russian, including territories that the aggressor country's army does not even control. At the same time, the so-called memorandum, where all of this was written down, was not handed over by the Russians to Kiev, Washington, or Ankara until the very last minute. And all of this was happening against the backdrop of massive shelling. Every day, the Russian army launched hundreds of drones and missiles at peaceful Ukrainian cities. Although previous rounds have shown that the sides' positions are fundamentally different, the new round of negotiations is very important and necessary. As in the previous talks, the Ukrainian delegation will be headed by Rustem Umerov. However, this time he'll be in a new role as Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council. At this meeting, Kiev has identified 3 main issues for dialogue and is counting heavily on progress.
We have agreed on what exactly should be on the meeting's agenda, which key topics are important for Ukraine. The release of our people from Russian captivity must continue. And now, right now, the necessary procedures for a new exchange have already begun. Tomorrow, we are expecting our people. I really hope that tomorrow everything will work out for us. We are making efforts, in particular thanks to our partners and international mediators, to ensure the release of civilian hostages as well, and the return of our children abducted by Russia. The task is to work towards a ceasefire. This is what the whole world is telling Russia. The task is to work on organizing a meeting of the leaders. This is something that can bring peace closer. Ukraine has never wanted war. And it is Russia that must end this war, the one it started itself.
The delegation of the aggressor country is once again headed by Vladimir Medinsky. And as Kremlin spokesman Peskov reported, there are no changes in the negotiating team. And in general, according to him, in Moscow, and I quote, they do not expect any breakthroughs of the miraculous kind from the negotiations. Peskov was also unable to answer the question of whether Putin is ready to meet with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Meanwhile, Kiev insists that in order to discuss strategic issues, a meeting must be held specifically at the level of the leaders.
It is very important that these meetings are substantive, but the other side has the mandate to discuss the most crucial issues, ending the war, achieving a ceasefire. So far, we do not see this. That is why one of the proposals was that, in order to truly discuss such strategic issues, a meeting should be held at the level of Zelenskyy and Putin, and it would be very good if President Trump, European leaders, and President Erdogan could also participate.
Many international experts have noted that the Kremlin decided to take part in the third round only after Trump issued an ultimatum. The U.S. president gave Putin 50 days to agree to a ceasefire. Otherwise, he threatened to impose trade tariffs. In the past month, Trump's rhetoric towards Putin has changed dramatically. He no longer seems to have any illusions or believe his words. And in Moscow, they are very afraid of angering the head of the White House even more.
We will send Patriot systems to Kiev, which they desperately need, because Putin has really surprised many people. He talks a good game, but then in the evening he bombs everyone. So there's a bit of a problem here. I really don't like it.
However, analysts from the American Institute for the Study of War note that Putin is still not ready for a real ceasefire. In their opinion, only real defeats of the Russian army on the battlefield could change this position. And for that, first and foremost, timely and sufficient military aid to Ukraine is needed.
Western economic pressure combined with sustained Western military support for Ukraine is necessary to enable Ukrainian forces to inflict battlefield losses on Russia, forcing Putin to reconsider his calculations and enter substantive peace negotiations to end the war. From the report of the Institute for the Study of War.
Another factor that could make Putin genuinely negotiate for peace, rather than just pretending to negotiate, is sanctions. The European Union has stated that it has already begun work on the 19th package of restrictions against Russia. First and foremost, it will target Moscow's energy sector and trade. NATO is also counting on the fact that such pressure will hit the Kremlin's ability to finance the continuation of the war. And if the U.S. does end up deciding on secondary sanctions, then not only China, but also India and Brazil will be demanding that the Kremlin agree to a ceasefire.
This is important. That's why today, if you're in Beijing, Delhi, or Brazil and you know this will affect you, you might want to call Vladimir Putin and say, "Friend, we're still buying from you, but you need to take negotiations for a ceasefire or a peace agreement seriously. Otherwise, we'll end up under secondary sanctions, which will directly impact Russia, of course. But this is really important, and the president has planned it skillfully."
Let me emphasize once again. The main thing Ukraine is counting on during the meeting in Istanbul is that we will be able to negotiate the return of our prisoners of war and the children who were abducted by Russia. Whether Moscow will agree to at least a 30-day ceasefire and what tricks it will come up with to avoid doing so, this is what the entire international community will be watching especially closely. And not just watching, but also drawing the appropriate conclusions.